very excited tonight to have the Vice Chair for Evangelization for the Archdiocese of Military Services. He is a married layperson working for the church, serving our military. He studied theology in Belgium, and he is truly an extraordinary person. I've had the pleasure of meeting him tonight, and I'm very, very excited to hear what he has to say about welcoming home wounded warriors, which is a particularly pertinent topic because we're preparing to welcome our troops home from Afghanistan, hopefully by the end of this calendar year. So please give a warm welcome to our most honored guest, Dr. Mark Moitoza.
If you seem like moving way over here for a long period of time.
I'm very happy to be here with you, especially on April Fool's Day. Mostly I'm glad that you had this schedule today because I was home with my kids this morning and all three of them were telling me all kinds of jokes. Then I went to have lunch with my son at his elementary school with all his kindergarten friends, and they kept making me turn my head around to see the squirrels running through the cafeteria. So thank you for not making me endure that through dinner. So I'm very pleased to be here with you tonight, and I'm also pleased to recognize those of you who ran for the Military Archdiocese in the Marine Corps Marathon. Last year, several of you did that for us. So could you raise your hand if you ran? Yeah. Great, thank you. Finally, I should tell you, my colleague Carol is here. Carol works in the development office, and I'm very happy she's here because I work in the office that spends all the money that she helps to raise. So that's good. So thanks for being here. I want to talk a little bit tonight about what we could do to welcome home wounded warriors, those who have been serving in the military who are coming back. And then talk first, very briefly, a little bit about what the Military Archdiocese is. So for those of you who don't know, you know that you're in the Archdiocese of Baltimore now, which has a geographical region. Military Archdiocese has no geographical region. It's called a particular or personal diocese to the Archbishop. What that means is we serve the pastoral needs of anyone who is Catholic who's serving in any branch of the military services. So that's a very different kind of system than what the Archdiocese of Baltimore is. You can actually look on a map and see the territory of the Archdiocese. We are at 220 U.S. military installations around the world in 29 countries, and we serve 1.8 million Catholics. Those are men, women, and their families who are serving in all 5 branches of the military services, those who are at VA medical centers throughout the United States, and also those who serve the U.S. government outside of our borders. So we encompass a lot of territory, not because it's our territory, but it's because we're serving the people where they're at. It also means trying to meet the pastoral needs of those who are deployed, which has been, as you know, for over these past dozen years, a tremendous strain on our military. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. The Military Archdiocese has about 235 Catholic priests to meet all those pastoral needs. So our offices are in Washington, D.C., and they are really designed to help support those Catholic priests, to help them in their ministry with what they do, and also anyone who volunteers as a coordinator for lay leadership, Catholic coordinators, pastoral leaders, coordinators of religious education, young adult ministry, which we think we have about 300,000 Catholic young adults throughout the Military Archdiocese. So this kind of gives you a little bit of a picture of who we are. To explain a little bit, if you know someone who's a Catholic priest, they already have a call to serve, a vocation to serve in the church. But we would say those who are Catholic priests in the military have a call within the call. So they have a call to serve the church, but then also a call to reach out to those in the military. So if a Catholic priest wants to do that, they then need to get permission from their bishop, and then get permission from the military archbishop, Archbishop Broglio, and then they apply to the branch of service that they want to serve in. So that gives you kind of a little bit of a scenario of what we are. So that you know, I am not in the military. I grew up in an Air Force family. My dad served in the Air Force for 26 years. And I also served as a Catholic Youth Ministry Coordinator at 2 Army posts in Germany. And I was over there during 9/11, and when we were getting ready to go to war in Iraq. So we'll speak a little bit about that tonight. So I want to talk first a little bit about the military itself. So what's a little bit different about what's been going on in these wars that we have been serving. I'll talk a little bit about moral wounds and moral injury, and and what that means, especially in light of what we are now calling in the military spiritual resiliency. So we'll hear a little bit about that. And then also talking about how we could be welcoming to those who have served, welcoming in our parishes, welcoming to those of us who know those who have served. So it might be good for us to just take a moment and ask, is there anyone here who has served in the military? So we have a few. So thank you for your service and thank you for being here. Is there anyone here who grew up in the military? All right. I'm always happy to see military brats. Thank you. Okay. Good. And among you, all of us who are here, how many of you know somebody who's in the military? Okay. That's great. That's pretty well represented. Basically in the United States, about 1 in 4 Americans know somebody who is serving in the military. So we have a connection. Okay? Really, when we look at the military, we're really looking at, over these past years, about 2.6 million people who have deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan over these past dozen years. Most of them come back okay. They had the experience, they served their country, but they come back okay. About 1/5 come back with serious trauma issues, which is, if you look at statistics, pretty normal for someone who experiences any kind of trauma. So if you think of a car accident, you think of, 2 weeks ago I met someone who was in the Discovery Building in Silver Spring, and he was the person who was taken hostage there, if you remember that from the news. Trauma experiences like that, okay? Or trauma experiences from seeing somebody shot or something like that here in the United States. So statistically, it's about the same. The difference is the type of experience of trauma that our young adults in the military have experienced at the level of operation that they have been living, at a high tempo of operation, is a little bit different than what we would say trauma has been for those who experience trauma here at home. So I said 2.6 million have been deployed. About 90% of those who have been injured survive those injuries. And that's due to the increased medical technology that is quickly available to those who have served. So it's very different than wars in the past, where people who might have had an injury on the front line, which really aren't really front lines anymore, but an injury in a hot zone would take a long time to get the medical attention that they need. So this is a big difference in people who are now surviving war wounds and sometimes going back to the battlefield right away, or coming back home. So we'll speak a little bit about what that looks like. Of the 2.6 million who have deployed, probably 860,000, over 860,000 have deployed more than 3 or 4 times, which is something that we don't often think about. And it's not just those who are on active duty. We're also now talking about people who are serving in the reserves, who have been activated to deploy multiple times, those in the National Guard who have been activated to deploy. So these are our neighbors. They're not just numbers or statistics of things that we hear about in the news. These are people who are in our neighborhoods, people who are in our parishes, people whose names we know, people who often in our parishes who we're praying for while they're deployed. When they come back, they talk about some very common health injuries. Some of the most common health injuries or wounds that they are experiencing have to do with their knees and their backs. So musculoskeletal wounds and injuries, these are types of things that they're fighting, as well as psychological issues, and then maybe also spiritual issues. So these are some really interesting things along with mental health that the military is starting to identify and trying to help people cope with. So we're not just talking about those who have been wounded physically, where you can see someone who's lost an arm, right? We're also, or in a wheelchair. We're also, go ahead, sorry. That's all right? Please carry on. So not just those, is this better? No. It's okay. Can you hear it now? No. I'll shout.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you know what, that would actually be very helpful.
Sorry. I didn't think I could hear myself in the speakers. That's good.
I mean, I guess
Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you hold this.
Oh.
All right. So we're not just talking about the wounds that are physical that we see. We're also talking about mental health injuries as well as the spiritual injuries. There's a great author called Dr. Ed Tick, and he wrote a book called War on the Soul, or War and the Soul. And in that, he interviews a lot of people who have gone to war. And one of the most interesting experiences he talks about is talking with a soldier who served in Vietnam, who was he was running away from enemy fire, and he felt that his body couldn't run fast enough. And he had this physical feeling of his soul almost coming out of his body, running ahead of him, right? So he's trying to chase and catch up to his soul, and is not really ever sure if they reintegrated. Right? This is a story he told to this psychologist, right? So the psychologist didn't challenge him on that. He just listened to that experience, and that is a different. Can you hear it now? Yes. It's a little louder. Okay. Sorry. That's okay. Thank you.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah. So that kind of reintegration, that experience, whether it happened or not, it was his experience of that. And always now wondering, was I ever reunited with my soul? Okay? So that's an interesting experience for someone in Vietnam. And then you could think of what it's like to go into the hell experience of being in a war setting and seeing things that we don't normally see, seeing things that we're really almost not supposed to see, right? And then trying to figure out, how do I become a whole person again when my whole world order has been changed around? Okay? So that's what I'm talking about when we're talking about spiritual wounds and also some moral injury. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So if that happens, if those kinds of experiences happen, we're really looking at our faith being challenged. So my world order, the way I understood the world to be, the way I might have even understood God, is totally different. Right? Why did God put me in this setting? I joined the military. This person could say, I joined the military to serve, and now I've been put into this total chaos, where I'm living a very high tempo, where I'm constantly on alert, hyper-vigilant, and I'm trying to figure out what is the meaning of life when I just lost somebody who was in my unit, someone very close to me. Or a battle buddy got severely injured and had to go back to the States. Right? So there's total chaos. So the world as I understood it will be totally changed around. Just that is disconcerting in itself. Right? And I could start having these questions about the deeper meaning questions in life, right? So what is the meaning of life becomes very, very prominent, very profound for those who are experiencing life lived at this very difficult level. And then how is war affecting service members and their families? Well, I told you I was serving in pastoral ministry in Germany, and I was there when the army was getting ready to go to Iraq for the first time. And in our youth group, we had a senior, and he knew that his dad was going to leave in March. He had orders to go and deploy, so he knew his dad would not be at his high school graduation, and probably wouldn't even be back in Germany when he was going to go to college. The orders came, and prior to those orders coming, their family had made a decision that they were going to have a family dinner, say their goodbyes on the evening before the dad was going to leave, and then they decided that that morning that all the kids would go to school. They would keep their normal routine, and the mother would take the father to his unit to deploy. So the orders came, they had their long dinner, their prayerful goodbyes, their tearful goodbyes, and then the next morning they did exactly what they had planned. The kids went to school, and the mom took the dad. When the kids came back from school, the dad was home, because the plane and the unit never took off. So they had to go the next day. So they had this dinner 3-4 times that week. So over and over again they were saying goodbye. So now Don, who was the senior I was telling you about, came to the youth group one night, and while this was happening, he said, I just wish that if this happened again, my dad would go get a hotel room and not come home, right? Now, because it was too hard to say goodbye over and over again, right? He was going through this emotional, it's very emotional. Right? You don't know, am I going to see my dad again? And it's hard to say goodbye over and over and over. But he wasn't looking for us to judge him or say, well, that's crazy, Don. If your dad came back, you've got a whole nother day. What a great gift. Right? You should rejoice in that. But he wasn't looking for that. He just needed to be able to articulate that experience without being judged. He needed to be able to say it and to release it, because he was holding on to it for several days. And he felt bad in a way for even saying it, but he needed to say that because this was his experience. Now that's before going to war. Okay, so now start thinking about families who have a loved one, and in these wars, it's been both moms and dads who have been serving in deployed settings, who who have brought kind of the war experience home. But if you're at home and you know basically in the vicinity of where your loved one is serving and you see something on the news, that could have an impact on you, especially if you don't hear from the person you love for a long time. Or there's also guilt feelings for family members if they miss a phone call because it's so hard to connect, right? So someone called me from Afghanistan, my parent called me from Afghanistan, but I wasn't there to receive it. So these were some of the issues while we were getting ready for war, while they were at war. But then when they come home, those who have deployed, they also bring some of these experiences that they've had home with them, not necessarily because they're talking about them, but because it's affected their way of living. Right? So that's important for us to keep in mind when we're praying for those who have served. So we have to constantly be thinking about that. Those who have deployed multiple times have multiple experiences, right? And so it's more and more intense for them. That's bringing more hardship. And you may have seen just the past few weeks, CNN has done an incredible series on those who have served. So they know statistically that about 22 veterans in the United States commit suicide every day. Right? But what we don't know are those who love them, those in their families, their parents, or their kids, what effects that has on them, or maybe those who have tried to do the same thing, attempted suicide, or are struggling in some ways. So that's some areas where we need to start paying attention as a society. What could we do? Now in the military archdiocese, we serve those who are in active duty, and we provide for the pastoral needs while they're in uniform. When they come back to a parish in the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and they're not in uniform anymore, they've gotten out of the military, they belong to the Archdiocese of Baltimore, to the parish that they belong to. So recently, well, maybe the past 2 years, we've been getting lots of calls in our offices asking, what could we do to welcome wounded warriors back? And our answer, unfortunately, has been, well, we don't know, because we work with them while they're on active duty, and we now hand them back to you, right? So there is a gap. And this is a bridge that really needs to be built between those who have the experience in the military, those of you here who have served or grown up in military families, and those who are trying to figure out what could we possibly do to reach out and listen to those who have served and be some kind of help. Certainly we can't solve all the problems, but there is something that a parish could certainly do to welcome wounded warriors or warriors themselves and their families back. So, for a little more context, let's look at what moral wounds are and spiritual resiliency. Moral wounds are the experience of being in a war setting and trying to navigate through life and making split-second decisions on things that you have been trained for. So you know the military does a lot of training. There's not just basic training, but if you're going to go into a deployed setting, you have to do a tremendous amount of training in order to be prepared for every possible situation. And then you're put into a totally chaotic situation, and you have to react quickly. So it's important to follow orders, it's important to follow your training, what you've done. And yet, because things happen in such a quick instance, sometimes there are things that happen to people that you're served with that you wonder if you had made a different decision, if you could have resulted in something better. Okay, so that's kind of the interesting challenge for those who are served. Sorry, I'm getting a signal from Matt to try to be louder, so that's why I'm looking at this. So that's kind of an interesting challenge for us to figure out. How can someone have this moral injury, right? Because they're trying to constantly second guess the decision they made in a split second. Okay? So, for an example of this is there's a captain who was in an IED explosion. He ended up flatlining and was flatlined for a while. I don't remember how long. But they were able, because of medical technology, to bring him back to life. Right? So that's a great story. Medical technology really stepped in and helped him. But he felt tremendous guilt because his staff sergeant, who was in the same IED explosion, died. And he was trying to figure out, was there another route we could have taken? Was there something else I could have done that would have helped him to be able to save his life? How do I now, as the captain, go and tell this family that I lost this staff sergeant? Right? So constantly second guessing his decisions and not having a lot of people to be able to talk to about it. And not being able to do much while he's in that setting until he comes home, because you have to keep moving. You have to keep on that high tempo of operations. and continuing the mission. So that's an experience of a moral injury. It's a decision that I made and to try to do something better, okay? And then trying to figure out how could have I done something that would have helped me to allow that person, thank you, that would have allowed that person to survive. So there's tremendous feelings of guilt. That's what we're talking about, moral injury or moral wounds. So we have the physical wounds that we all can see, right? We have the mental wounds that are difficult to see, but there are a lot of psychologists for it, and also kind of these spiritual wounds. So how do we help those who have served go from darkness to light? And when we get ready for the Easter Vigil here, at the end of Lent, our churches will be dark. And very, very slowly they will become lighter and lighter because of the Christ candle. Right? That slow integration of light is really what we're talking about with those who have served and have experienced these moral injuries. How do we help them see the light of Christ when they are able to and when they are ready to? That's what moral injury is all about, how to help them experience it. Most of them have experienced good luck because they weren't the one who was next to the IED, right? It was the one next to them, and yet they feel guilt because they were lucky enough to stay alive. So how do we help them with that? So we need to really look at some ways that we can address some of these invisible wounds so that they can experience that light again, that wholeness again, and to move beyond their guilt. So what are some ways to do that? Well, in the Catholic Church, or in religion itself, there are some things that help bring out some familiarity, right? So we have the ritual of our Eucharistic celebration, we have spiritual direction, familial prayers, all of these things that we grew up with and can go back to are really helpful. Is there an echo for you too? No, it's just in my ears. Okay, good. All right. So some of those things from spirituality, we could do some bridging between religion and faith. We can help them to understand their relationship with self and others, with their self and God. We can help them combat the desire or the issue that they deal with, never wanting to forgive themselves, right? Or feeling not worthy because they felt that they should have made a different decision. And yet, if you actually hear their story, you could probably understand that there was nothing else that they could have done. So there's a need somehow to release that story. A lot of times they hold on to it so tightly, and they think that nobody wants to listen to it. They're walking around with that kind of guilt. And there's a way that we can help release that when they're ready to do it. So healing after trauma really is helping somebody who is deployed trust again, to start feel security again. You know, as we get ready for July 4th and hear fireworks, they're an expression of celebration for us, but often for those who have served, it's a reminder of what a war zone is like. The same thing for a vacuum cleaner. Those sounds can be triggers. I had dinner one evening with a priest who had deployed. Not only did he have the experience of trauma, he also listened to others. Right? So in counseling others, he took on their trauma too, from listening. And as we were eating dinner, a big metal tray dropped behind him, and he shot about 5 feet out of his seat, and then apologized for it. Right? But he shouldn't have to apologize. That was his experience. And we have to accept you're coming back into our society with that experience. And so helping those who have served build that trust, build that security, build a sense of safety again, and understand their own identity and self-worth. Right? So you can come back from an experience like this and try to handle it on your own and deal with it through self-medication, whether through alcohol or drugs or any other kind of unhealthy way. Right? But if there's a community of support around them, whether it's an immediate family, a parish, neighbors, who are starting to see some of these triggers, to say, I think you need some help, right? Or we need someone who can listen. Those would be some things that we need to start being aware of, because the effects of the war and those who have deployed are probably going to be with military families for the next 10 years. So that's a long time for us to really say, what could we do? So when I began talking, I said in parishes, we do really often a good job of praying for those who are serving in the military, those who are deploying. Sometimes, especially during the prayer of the faithful, some parishes even have pictures of those who have deployed. But we often haven't done a very good job of welcoming people back. Right? So it means that for us to start paying attention in our parishes, in our neighborhoods, who has served, and letting them know that you're glad they're back, that you care about them. Right? So a parish could do a couple things to do that. I asked how many of you knew people in the military, because it's helpful for us to say, well, when they come back, if those people you know have served and deployed, when they come back, we need to check in on them. We need to see if they're getting the help that they need. We need to start listening to them when they're ready to share their story. So a parish could actually create a veterans, like a veterans lounge. Not a program, not a place where they're going to solve all their problems, but just a place where they could go and know that it's safe. It could be a place like this. You come and have a meal, have a drink, and there are other people there. It could actually even be a place for older veterans to hang out, because they actually can listen to the stories of those who have served even better than us. They have some deeper experiences of that. Right? So those are kind of interesting things that could happen, because when they have a safe place, slowly, and when they're ready, they can start to tell their story. Right? So they can release it. What we've asked people in the military to do is not only to train for war and then go fight that war, but then to come back and hold on to those experiences. So in other words, I'm asking you to train for this, to go walk into hell, to experience people dying, to experience trauma, and then come back and then never ask you about it. Thank you for your service. Right? We have lots of applause in airports, and that's fantastic. But there needs to be more. Right? There needs to be an opportunity for those who need to release that story to be able to do so. And they will only do it with others who really are willing to authentically listen. Some will check your shoes out to see if you serve. Right? So my shoes wouldn't count. Right? But if I had combat boots on, or I was wearing hiking boots, they might be more willing to share their story, because they have an immediate identity reference that you're going to understand a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. Okay? And there's a tradition for this in the Native Americans. And that's something that we need to be reminded of. The Native Americans were trained warriors. They were warrior tribes. And a warrior, when they were finally ready and fit enough to go and defend the tribe, not only were they asked to go out and do that, but the very first time that they did it, they were also expected to come back to the whole community and in a listening circle, share with everybody how they defended the tribe, what they did, right? And what they saw, what they witnessed, what they experienced. Because the tribe felt that it was their job to defend them, but it was the tribe's job now to hold that story. Right? That was extremely important, and it helped that community to thrive. We have not, unfortunately, translated that into parish life, or maybe into community life. We might read a lot about what's going on in the deployed settings or those in the military in the paper, but we need to start interacting more and listening. So that's extremely important for us to really help those who have served to share their story, to remind them of the importance of ritual, to help them to uncover some of this moral injury so that they realize that what they did in their split-second choice was probably the only possible decision they could have made. But until they're able to articulate it in the most safe environment, they're not going to be able to come to terms with it or to realize it. Sometimes it goes deeper, and as I said before, a veterans lounge is not a place that's going to solve all the problems. Really, a parish could do some great things by creating a resource list of those who are professionals in the community, whether they're counselors, people who work at VA medical centers, people who work to help veterans find jobs, people who can deal with medical issues, all that kind of stuff would be important for a parish to have, because then you can have this great reference tool and have other people walk with them. So imagine if you've experienced trauma and then you want to go get services at the VA medical center. Well, that's filling out paperwork, and there's some people here who know the VA medical system, right? That's filling out a ton of paperwork. So if you have trouble focusing because of trauma, you're going to start and then give up pretty easily. So there's a place where you can help, right? I can help walk you through the paperwork. And if it's too hard for you, we'll come back another time. Right? Always on their terms, not ours. So these are some very simple things beyond just praying for those who are deployed, beyond just connecting with those through pictures, but really checking in on those that we know, those in our families who have served, or making sure that they're getting the help that they need. Most importantly is actually helping them find jobs, because until they have security, financial security, they're not going to work on the other stuff. It's going to be too hard. So there's some really interesting dynamics with all of that. So many of those who have served have deployed so many times that there are tons and tons of stories to uncover. And it may not be in the parish where they're able to do it all. There are lots of veteran retreats, there are a lot of other places to plug in, and slowly dioceses around the United States are starting to make some of these connections. The Archdiocese of Washington now has a committee to try and help pastors realize some of this language and to figure out how they could build some resources to support military families. The Diocese of Metuchen in New Jersey by Newark has a whole apostolate reaching out to those in the military, and especially the reserves, because they realize they have 40,000 reserve members who are living within their community. So they're really trying to make some connections. And then Archdiocese of Chicago has worked with VA medical centers to bring in VA chaplains to give a better articulation of what our soldiers are coming back with, what are the trauma experiences like, and what can the VA medical centers do to really help them. So the VA medical centers actually have a great website about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which gives tons and tons of information in language that we could understand that was really, really useful to be able to help. So these are some really kind of interesting connections that I think can help bring our deployed men and women from darkness into light. And that is really what our challenge is. How do we help anyone who's experienced some kind of woundedness move toward Christ? You know, the Holy Father talks about a vision of the church that he would like the church to be like a military field hospital, which of course in the military sciences we really like this analogy, right? But really what he's talking about is not the military, he's talking about the woundedness that all of us carry. And how can the church meet us where we're at in our spiritual woundedness, in the areas where we need healing and reconciliation, and how can we do that in such a way that as we recover, we then are able to help others recover too. This whole time of Lent is focused on reconciliation, and that's a real opportunity for us to think about how we're connecting better with Christ so that we may also serve, and serve those who have served us. And that, I hope, in this short talk, gives you some kind of ideas of what the military has been experiencing, what are some practical ways that we might be able to do some things, in addition to praying for them, and then also get a better sense of what it is that they're dealing with, to be able to be a little bit more cognizant of how we can be bridge builders too. So thanks for listening through the microphone on and off. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take